Hello and welcome to Sideline Story, your destination for sports news, analysis and discussions. I'm Guan. This week we explore the NBA Finals. Which franchise is looking to have the edge? How do you evaluate their road to the finals? To unpack the questions, I'm joined here with my fantastic co-hosts Tian Yu and Brandon Yates. Alright, let's begin with the big picture. The San Antonio Spurs and the New York Knicks are facing off in the NBA Finals.
Yeah.
A month ago, if somebody told me it would be these two teams in the NBA Finals, I would say they are a little delusional, but here we are. So Tian Yu, from your side of things, what are their biggest strengths, for each team? And on the flip side, where are they most vulnerable?
Well, the way I see it, I think the final would be like a battle between elite offense and elite defense. San Antonio, everything starts with defense. And it's not just about having Victor Wembanyama, who is the defensive player of the year. It's also about the efforts and energy the whole team gets from everyone on the floor. One thing that really stood out to me in the Western Conference Finals was how they beat OKC at exactly OKC's own game. They kind of grabbed every chance in transition situations, and they were excellent at turning rebounds into, fast break opportunities and attacking before the opponents kind of set their defense right. Also, I think another big strength of San Antonio is their three-point shooting. The Spurs have been really fearless from deep all season. I think players like Dylan Harper, Devin Vassell, and Stephen Castle, they kind of never hesitate whenever they get the opportunities to shoot from three. And even Wembanyama, who isn't known as an elite shooter, he has shown he's willing to take and make huge shots when the moment demands it. And a typical example would be his clutch three in Game 1 against OKC, and that was like the perfect example. Nobody expected it, but he just did it. He stepped up and just delivered.
Yeah, it kind of decided the whole series, if we think about it.
Yes, that was a big moment. And for the Knicks, I think their biggest strength is their firepower. Jalen Brunson is the engine of their offense, and I think he's one of the toughest players to face off for opponents. Then you add him with Karl Anthony Towns, who can score inside, stretch the floor, and even create opportunities for his teammates. Around them, OG and Bridges, they can provide scoring, they can defend, and they offer, versatility on the floor. Just look at what they did in the Eastern Conference Finals. Their offense really overwhelmed Cavaliers for long stretches of the games.
Right. San Antonio might be the first real test for the Knicks in their playoff run. Brandon, based on what we've seen so far, which side has the better odds to walk away with the Larry O'Brien trophy?
On paper, San Antonio definitely takes it, but I think that New York are going to bring a physicality and a desire that I don't think we're going to have seen in the finals for quite some time. And it'll be interesting to see how San Antonio and Wemby in particular deal with that level of aggression and sort of like in-your-face approach, which I think is the way that New York are going to handle this sort of underdog tag, which I think they actually really enjoy, particularly Jalen Brunson. I really do think that they like to be undervalued or seen as, a surprise package. All of those elements, I think it's played into their hands. And I think they've been so desperate and so close to getting to a finals for quite some time. San Antonio as well. But it seems like there's always been a lot more talk about New York and their absence from finals. So now that they've got this chance, I think it really is massive for them. That being said, San Antonio definitely has some pedigree in the history of the NBA when it comes to, finals performances and some elite players and teams that they've had in the past. But yeah, I think that the rest, the mental approach, and ultimately injuries, I also think that one or two injuries could derail both of these teams a lot more heavily than we've seen in NBA finals in the past. I think, if a Wemby or a Jalen Brunson got injured, I think that would completely almost, I think that would almost capitulate either team's approach to these finals. So I think there's a couple of things that could make it go either way. But just from a pure sort of non-tactical approach. I think that the rest time, the mental approach and injuries is going to be something that's very, very important to watch out for. But just to talk about strengths and weaknesses, I think, we've already touched on a few of them, and New York's ones are pretty obvious. Their elite wing defense, dominant rebounding and physicality, obviously, particularly with Carl Anthony Towns, who I'm a big fan of. Jalen Brunson, I think that everyone in New York is going to be wearing Jalen Brunson shirts, and I think that he's going to be the most famous person probably in America, along with Wemby for the next week or so, or next couple of weeks. And I think that he's going to be, him and Wemby are going to be walking around with being wrapped in cotton wool. And everything's going to be done to make sure that they can deliver the best performances. But just from New York's perspective, Brunson's half court shot creation and late game scoring, I think has, been really pivotal for New York, throughout the season and in a couple of series that they've been in. And of course, tremendous playoff momentum. It'll be interesting to see how San Antonio deals with Madison Square Garden. And then, yeah, the weaknesses are obvious. New York can become overly reliant on Brunson. I think that is something that they are concerned about, and I'm sure that they're coming up with plans to deal with that. I think they also have less transition power than San Antonio. I think that's something that Wemby in particular is particularly great at. We've mentioned his clutch moments. Sinking threes when it's unexpected, and I think he is someone that can transition from defense to offense incredibly well, along with other players. Like they're excellent. I'll get into San Antonio's strengths. I'll start with one. Their depth of youth. From like Stephen Castle, Dylan Harper. Some of these players that we've been talking about in the last NBA podcast. Wemby's support cast, I think, is just incredibly athletic and physical, and I think that's something that New York have to be very concerned about. So yeah, let's and again, back to New York's weaknesses. I think defensive pressure on Brunson can definitely create matchup problems against athletic guards. San Antonio also has the ability to generate transition opportunities and create mismatches before defenses are set. And I think that's something that other teams have really struggled to deal with. Is just that pace, that transitional pace, is something that is really very exciting to watch indeed. Similar to what maybe Arsenal faced against PSG. Had to get in a mention there. PSG Champions League winners and Arsenal are not. And then some of the San Antonio weaknesses. I think that a lack of finals experience. I think that's something that is a relative weakness, but I don't think that's going to affect them greatly. I don't think it really affects any team when they get to the finals. I think that most teams that get there feel like they deserve to be there and they grab the opportunity with both hands. And I think that with San Antonio, it's not going to be any different. I don't think we're going to see, and from New York for that matter, I don't think we're going to see any reduced performances from either of those teams. I think we're going to see the best from both squads.
Yeah, right. I think what Brandon just said reminds me of what Luis Enrique said about how he kind of drew inspiration from basketball teams and just formulated his own tactics, transition. As we've seen, as we've seen in PSG games, finding loopholes in transitions is becoming like their trademark tactics. And similarly, I think the Spurs are doing the same, and not just the Spurs, OKC are doing the same. I think transition would be like a key point to focus on in the finals.
Yeah, Luis Enrique is quite a big basketball fan.
Yes.
He also compared Michael Jordan with Kylian Mbappe when Mbappe was with PSG, right?
Like a slightly different idea about
he said
that comparison.
To Mbappe that look at Jordan, he leads his players not only in offense but also in defense. But about this NBA finals, there's a Chinese cartoon, the big head son and the small head father. It's very popular in China, Chinese fans call the NBA finals another version of that cartoon because of the two superstars of the two teams, Brunson and Wembanyama. They're quite like the figures in that cartoon. But I don't see Brunson, have some easy time. There's no James Harden to bully on. But if you think about it, the final bit of the NBA this year is a repeat of the mid-season NBA Cup.
Yeah.
San Antonio eliminated OKC to reach the final, where they met with the New York Knicks. The Knicks went on to win the title at that time. I'm not saying the script will be exactly the same, but it kind of reflected and forecasted who are the biggest teams in the NBA this season.
Yes.
Before we move on, here's a quick review of the biggest sports headlines in China and around the world for the past week. Aryna Sabalenka was dumped out of the French Open on a windy Wednesday at Roland Garros as Diana Schneider staged the inspired comeback to beat the world number 1 3-6, 7-5, 6-love. In a tournament that has already witnessed several shocks, including premature exits for defending champion Coco Gauff and four-times winner Iga Swiatek, Sabalenka's collapse was another unexpected jolt through the field. With world number 1 Jannik Sinner and 24-times major winner Novak Djokovic also early casualties, it means for the first time since the 1977 edition of Roland Garros, there will be no Grand Slam champion featuring in the semi-finals of a major. In table tennis, Saarbrücken beat Düsseldorf 3-1 in the German Bundesliga final to clinch a historic treble for the club. Chinese Grand Slam winner Fan Zhendong won the first and fourth matches for his club.
Personally, I have learned a lot here, not just in competition, but also in life and many other aspects. I'm so glad that we have won 3 titles this season, but I think I still have a lot to work on.
Fan will join Düsseldorf next season. Chinese sportswear brand Li Ning has signed a long-term partnership with NBA star Stephen Curry and his Curry brand. The partnership comes after Under Armour and Curry split in 2025, ending a nearly 13-year relationship. The deal covers basketball, golf, and active lifestyle products. Naismith Hall of Fame basketball coach Rick Adelman has died at 79. Adelman ranks 10th in NBA history with over 1,000 wins as a head coach. Across 23 seasons as a head coach for the Blazers, the Warriors, the Kings, the Rockets, and the Timberwolves, Adelman amassed a winning record of over 50%. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2021 and received NBCA's Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award in 2023. World Cup teams including Germany, England, Argentina, and Brazil have arrived in the United States. For Brazil, much of the attention has focused on veteran star Neymar, who was included on the squad despite dealing with a calf injury. Carlo Ancelotti remains optimistic that the 34-year-old could be available for Brazil's opening match. He believes the competition is wide open.
The expectation is the same as always from everybody in Brazil. I think that in this World Cup, there is no single favorite. There are stronger teams, but I believe Brazil will compete with all the other squads.
The World Cup will open on June the 11th. Florentino Perez has announced that Jose Mourinho will return as Real Madrid head coach if he's re-elected club president in Sunday's elections. Mourinho's commitment to return to the club has been an open secret for weeks. Welcome back. Now let's rewind to the Western Conference Final Series. San Antonio took down Oklahoma City in 7 games to punch their ticket here. Tianyu, how did that series actually play out? Was it more about Spurs, imposing their will, or did the Thunder beat themselves?
Well, for me, I think this was much more about the Spurs winning the series than OKC losing it. Before Game 7, Dylan Harper said it would take everyone in the team to really step up to beat the OKC, and I think that was exactly what happened in that finals. Wembanyama led the scoring in Game 7, but guess who was the second leading scorer? Julian Champagnie.
Right, yeah.
So that was pretty remarkable when you consider the difference in salary and just the level of expectations between those players. And it just shows how deep this Spurs team is and how much production they're getting from these role players. It's just not Champagnie. 5 Spurs players scored in double digits in that game. What impressed me the most was the way they win the games. It was they beat OKC in a style that OKC usually dominates. They played very aggressively, they defend hard, they share the ball. The Spurs just kept getting better as the series went on.
Yeah.
And I think by Game 7, they looked like the more confident team. As for OKC, I don't think they collapsed. I think they still played a very decent game. Even with Jalen Williams dealing with injury issues, I think they still showed why they are one of the deepest and most dominant team in the league. And apart from that, I think the biggest disappointment actually came from Chet Holmgren. Throughout the series, he's never fully, comfortable against Wembanyama. His impact dropped a lot on both ends of the floor. And I think that's not something people would expect him going on in that matchup. So by the end of the series, I think it really felt like Wembanyama totally outshined Chet Holmgren in that finals. I think when your franchise player is winning his matchup that decisively, is just really hard to beat a team as deep as San Antonio.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the key is how San Antonio changed their game strategy mid-series when they were like 3-2 down. They really picked up their offensive pace a lot to create more transitions and open spaces instead of being obsessed with finding Wemby every possession.
Yeah.
Whenever OKC missed a shot in the final two games, San Antonio would launch their attack as quickly as possible. Just push the ball, find the open shooter, and pull up. A possession can be done in 3 seconds.
Yes.
But Brandon, from your side of things, did San Antonio win that series or did OKC lose?
It was a bit of both, but I think the most important takeaway from that series, particularly going into the finals, is that Spurs evolved into a championship caliber team. And I think that is what's making them the out and out favorites for these finals. Whereas, in the beginning of the season, I don't think many people were talking about them, but I think that the way that they were able to grow from strength to strength and grow in confidence and not solely rely on Wemby, I think is something that really transformed this team. And the fact that they're reaching their peak by the time they get to the finals really makes them a very scary prospect. But in this series in particular, where Spurs won, of course, it always starts and ends with Wemby. The best player in the series won the finals MVP in the Western Conference unanimously, averaged 27.3 points, 10.9 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks. I mean, just fantastic numbers, and like we've all said, consistently altered games on both ends, and just really is just this phenomenal talent. And we also touched on earlier the depth, that really stepped up for San Antonio. In particular, I'm a big fan of Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper. There are more players than those two, but I think them in particular really offers major contributions. And we've spoken about some of the threes in Game 7 and, multiple Spurs players delivering key moments alongside Wemby. And I think that's crucial. And from a mental standpoint, I think Spurs proved that they can handle adversity. Wemby was fouled out in Game 7. Luke Cornett's defensive sequence helped swing momentum late, and San Antonio still closed out the game. So they do seem to be able to handle surprise moments and unexpected scenarios very, very well. And I think that's very important in a conference finals and in a NBA finals.
Right. Finally, let's look at the New York side. The Knicks' road to the NBA finals this season wasn't just about one season effort. It's been a multi-season progress.
Yeah.
They moved on from Tom Thibodeau after 5 seasons and brought in Mike Brown as the head coach. And instead of, chasing the biggest names in the market, they quietly assembled a roster of stars and role players who weren't necessarily the biggest names. So Tianyu, looking back at over the last few seasons, how do you evaluate New York's team building strategy?
Yeah, I think this Knicks team definitely deserves a lot of credit for how they've built this team. I think for years, a lot of teams try to rebuild through, the draft and just wait for, young talents to develop. But the Knicks kind of took a different path. They kind of focused on building, a tough and competitive team culture first. And then they aggressively, upgraded the team roster whenever opportunities came along. And the move that changed everything, of course, was signing Jalen Brunson. I mean, he gave the team kind of an identity and a leader. But they didn't stop there, and they actually kind of kept adding players who fit together. So Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG, like you said, they aren't always the biggest names in the league. They play hard, they defend, and they kind of understand their roles on the floor. And then came the big signing for Karl Anthony Towns. And to get him, the Knicks actually have to give up good players like Julius Randle and DiVincenzo, along with valuable draft picks. That's quite a risky move, I would say. But it showed they believed that their championship window was open right now. What I like most about their strategy is that they didn't chase stars for the sake of chasing stars. I think they kind of targeted players who fit together and complemented Bronson's game. And also, speaking of Bronson, I think his efforts is like the most underrated part of this whole rebuilding process, because he's willing to take a team-friendly contract, a contract that lowered his salary and that gave the front office more flexibility to keep improving the roster. And I think in today's NBA, I think that's a pretty rare move, because it helped the Knicks build a deeper team. It also showed the kind of culture they're trying to create in this team. So yeah, when you look at the roster in New York, I think it's really the result of several smart moves adding up over time. And I think, like you said, it wasn't one blockbuster move. It was years of building, tweaking, making sure every piece fits in the puzzle.
Really, I like the chemistry of this New York team. Partly because, Brunson, Bridges, and Hart were college teammates. It's like New York front office brought in Jalen Brunson and then said, okay, why don't we just bring in his best buddies?
Yes.
Brandon, how much credit should the front office get for identifying undervalued talent within New York, rather than swing in for splashy headlines?
Oh, I think they deserve a lot of credit, but I think they've been watching movies. I don't know if you guys have seen Moneyball, but this tactic has kind of been tried and tested in baseball before, with the Oakland Athletics. They couldn't compete with the New York, they've gone
Yankees,
the baseball
Mets.
team, man. The New York Yankees. Geez, where did my brain go? Sorry, they couldn't compete with the Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, and they had to try and figure out a way to compete with these teams that had the ability to, well, firstly, buy all of their players. I think all of the Oakland A players were going to like New York or to Boston, and they had to figure out a way to deal with the salaries that these teams were able to offer. And their front office, they brought in a couple of new names and a couple of mathematical people, and they were able to identify talent that was undervalued that they could bring in at a low cost that was extremely effective. And it sounds like New York has done something relatively similar. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that they're a struggling franchise. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're still the second most valuable franchise in the NBA behind the Golden State Warriors, and they do have a massive fan base. And I don't think they are short of cash, but I think that they are approaching it in a more team-friendly way, as opposed to just identifying superstars and throwing a bunch of money at them and hoping for the best, which does work sometimes, but it's not that consistent. I think building a team that is cohesive as a unit and is very dedicated to the cause is the most important thing, and I think that New York has done that exceptionally well. And it starts with Brunson, but then it also leads to Bridges, OG, Josh Hart, Karl Anthony Towns, and all of these players that have come in that have proven to be undervalued but incredibly effective. And I think New York and Mike Brown, I suppose, in particular, and also team president Leon Rose, they've all done a fantastic job in building this team that has finally gotten New York to the finals. And I think that, just in terms of Mike Brown, I think that he seems to have modernized aspects, of the offense without sacrificing the defensive identity that made the Knicks successful. And I think that's something that I've also spoken about, the defensive element in the Madison Square Garden effect. The Knicks have always been a very abrasive, sort of difficult team to break down. But I think there is a lot more offensive stardust around them now than there used to be. And I think a lot of that revolves around Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns in particular, but they also do have some supporting cast members that have been relatively underspoken about lately. But I think this is what I think is potentially going to be interesting about New York in the finals. I think that everyone's going to be talking about Brunson and Towns in particular, but I think we're going to see some surprise players step up and deliver some epic performances for New York. We are expecting great performances from some of Wemby's teammates because they've already delivered that in the Western Conference Finals. But I think that New York are going to surprise us. I think we're going to see some really impressive performances from names that we weren't expecting. And I think a lot of that has come down to, like you mentioned, Yang Guang, the impact of the front office and how New York have been able to quietly build a really impactful, successful team.
Yeah, let's see how the NBA Finals will end this year. Is it the beginning of Wemby's era, or will years of build-up efforts of New York pay off finally? With that, we end this episode of Sideline Story. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to Sideline Story and leave your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information, check our website at radio.cgtn.com. Until next time, stay on the sidelines with us.